About a month ago, Venerable Samten and I were in Uruguayana in Brazil, and it's a small city that's in the southernmost part of Brazil that shares a border with Argentina and Uruguay. And apparently, a lot of people in Brazil don't know where it is because it's so far south, yeah. And we were there to participate in an international conference on peace and compassion in education, partly because we both are former school teachers. And about a week before we left, I actually just resolved to stop reading the news because it was putting my mind in such a negative place. Yeah, there was this whole thing about a trade war and whatever, and my mind just went really in a very unhappy place. And I thought, I've got to have some distance from the object that's making these afflictions arise. So I took that break. And I wanted to mention that for context because the whole trip in Uruguayana felt a bit like going to some kind of ideological pure land for me. So that was a real surprise. So maybe I'll explain what I mean by that. I mean, first of all, the current government of Brazil is kind of center left, which is my own political affinity. And the whole conference was sponsored by the federal government. And it was organized by the Federal University of Pampa. And if you're able to get into a federal university in Brazil, which I understand is fairly competitive, it's basically a free ride all the way to the PhD level. And if you are from like a lower income group, you can get subsidized meals at the school cafeteria. So that in and of itself is like, wow, right? So this conference was completely free of charge. It was hosted at the downtown theater. The theater did not charge the organizers anything either because it was a free event. And 3 schools actually closed for the 2 days so that all their teachers and also the students who would be future kindergarten teachers could attend. So, just that, just the kind of logistics that demonstrate the whole community's commitment to peace and compassion and education, that kind of deep interest was, palpable from the start. And of course, this was reflected by the comments that the people were making at the beginning of the conference. Of course, you have the mayor there. There were education secretaries from Uruguayana, the nearby towns. Even like the neighboring town of Argentina sent a government rep. And what really surprised me was just to hear all these government folks, it seemed to me, speak completely sincerely about the importance of education of the heart. How important it is to educate human beings. One of them, the president of the University of Pampa itself was quoting Paulo Freire, who is a very important Brazilian educator and philosopher, who is famous for the book Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So, you can look him up. But, he's famous for saying, education without love is not education. So, that's what the president of the university says from the start. And hearing this, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm home. Yeah, this is like, we're on the same page. And so that's kind of how it felt throughout the whole conference. I just wanted to share some of the highlights of the presentations with you. There was one panel on the first day that was about territories of peace. So there was a professor of history from Uruguay who gave his presentation basically about how so many of the national borders that we live by today were drawn in colonial times. So these are all artificial divisions. And people who live on both sides of these borders share so much more in common in terms of culture, in terms of history. So just till today, we're living by this line drawn in the sand by somebody else a very long time ago. And because of that, there's a lot of conflict in the world. Yeah, so just hearing someone kind of put that out there, talk about the importance of us learning the history around different borders, talk about how, people on both sides of the border, right? One side is going to say this person is their hero, and then the people on the other side are going to say, wait, that's the guy who invaded us, he's not our hero. Yeah, so just talking about the role that history plays in creating conflicts that occur still today. So I just appreciated hearing him talk about that. And later on, we were talking too about how, that's the cause of what we see so much in the world now. Yeah. India and Pakistan, what's happening in the Middle East. It's some people a long time ago drew a line in the sand and we're still fighting about it. It's just completely unnecessary suffering. Then following him, there was an environmental scientist, I think, who works for in Corrientes in Argentina. And he talked about how natural reserves are kind of zones of peace. He was talking about how these areas that are protected by governments are actually, yeah, places where we learn to seek forgiveness from the land. Yeah. So just hearing someone again from government talk about forgiveness and seeking it and how important it is to preserve the environment for that purpose was for me very moving. And then later in the afternoon, there was a presentation by a professor who is from Canada, but she lives in Uruguay because her husband is from Uruguay. And she talked about how a lot of science fiction today is presenting kind of a nihilistic view of the climate and also the future of humanity and how that's affecting us. I think she called it like ecophobia or cli-fi, just like, oh, the world's gonna end. But she was looking at the implications because apparently science fiction has had a very strong influence on powerful people in the tech industry, like tech billionaires who are trying to create these things they watch or read. Including, of course, the whole movement of the hyper-wealthy to go colonize a new planet instead of investing those resources in this planet and how to take care of it. So she was making a very important point there, I thought. She referenced this article called Capitalistic Science Fiction, How the Tech Billionaires Are Going to Save Our World. It's an ironic title, and it's only in Spanish, but it was just good food for thought. Yeah, like why is society moving in that direction? So, but I will say by far the most inspiring session for me was at the end of the 2 days of conference, where we got to listen to Dr. Jan Willis present about how I learned nonviolence. And she did so via Zoom because the trip was going to be too long for her. So she presented via Zoom. People had the opportunity to hear her dubbed over in Brazilian Portuguese while we listened to the original English. And she basically she talked about how she grew up in Alabama near a mining camp and how she marched with Martin Luther King, how her whole family was involved in that whole movement of nonviolent resistance, and also showed pictures from her life. So, I mean, some of it's covered in her autobiography, Dreaming Me, but something was just very moving about hearing her relate that whole story, especially in this moment in American history. I don't know, I cried through a good portion of that presentation, and it will be posted online, and we will watch it as a community. So anyhow, that presentation culminated in her then talking to a teacher from Uruguayana who is from the Black movement Uruguayana. So kind of a younger woman. So she appeared on stage and she was responding to Jan's presentation. So by the power of technology and interpretation, we had these two women from different countries, different generations, all involved in the same kinds of, movement against racism, talking to each other, sharing their experiences through simultaneous interpretation. It was like, whoa, kind of mind-blowing to watch. Yeah, so, and they just reiterated how important it would be if she could go to Uruguayana, just her presence would be appreciated. Because I think very much, all of Latin America, is living the legacy of colonial rule and slavery still, I mean, as we are here in America. So, so that was another very inspiring moment. So there were many, many good things that happened, but I think one moment I'd like to leave you with is what happened when we went to the schools after that. So we had 2 days of this international conference. Venerable Samten and I did a workshop on working with anger at the university that had a smaller, more cozy group. And then we had the opportunity to visit 2 schools. So one was a high school where the students were preparing to be future teachers, and then one was a K through 12 school. And I was just personally so amazed by the warm reception of these little children. I think in Singapore, you do not hug your teacher, yeah? So I was just shocked to go into elementary school and have kids be like, can we hug you? I'm like, okay, is this legal? Are we gonna have problems? So all these little kids hugging us. And at the end of the visit, this child came up with a sheaf of like 40 cards that they had hand-drawn that morning. And all these cards were like, welcome to my country, welcome to our school. And they had the American flag and the Canadian flag. They drew 2 women holding hands with hair, and we were like, is that them or us? I mean, so they were just beautiful cards. And I just felt so like, wow, I hope this is still the case in the schools in the US. I don't know, this kind of welcome the stranger, right? Like, please, whatever country you're from, you are so welcome here. Being around that message and that kind of community embrace was very important for me, and also healing in some ways, just, because of what we're seeing in the news, which seems to tell the opposite story. Yeah. So I felt very resourced by this kind of surprise visit to Pure Land. But I mean, the point of going to Pure Land is to get awakened quickly, right? So you can continue to manifest and help in the world. So I kind of thought of the trip that way. It's like reminding myself, no, lots of pockets of communities out there in the world are doing really helpful, important things. Yeah, creating peace in the chaotic world is not unique to Sravasti Abbey. I mean, there's so many people working together to do that, and it's so important that we connect with communities that are like-minded, that we resource each other, and after that community resourcing moment, we have to continue this very difficult work, and to continue to create peace in a chaotic world in all the spheres of influence that we have, whether it's in terms of teaching history in the classroom, working on the environment, telling people how to read literature, or as we are, learning how to meditate and work with anger. There are just so many ways we bring goodness into the world. So let's not forget that, even if sometimes the news seems terribly bleak and difficult. Yeah. So let's continue to connect in community. I think that has become ever so much more important in these times.